Welcome to the ReReview podcast, where we watch movies from our past with a perspective from today. Your hosts are Matt, Bobby, and Austin, and we have an immense love for the films of our youth, so we're taking a look back to see if they still hold up. On this episode, we are discussing Goldeneye, released in 1995, directed by Martin Campbell, starring Pierce Brosnan, Sean Bean, and Izabella Scorupco. This movie tells the story of James Bond trying to locate a weapons program called Goldeneye. This movie is somewhat pivotal as it resurrected the Bond series from its 6-year slumber. Really kicked something off there in the 90s. Now, this is a fair warning. We're spoiling a 26-year-old movie, so if you haven't seen it, we'll be revealing key plot points. Now, this was Matt's choice, so he's going to open up the discussion. So, Matt, tell us how you felt about Goldeneye.
The nostalgia factor was heavy with this one, to be honest. Like, I played the N64 GoldenEye game religiously growing up. I probably wore out many of joysticks on those old N64 controllers playing this game. And I feel like that experience kind of overwrote the movie itself in my mind. And so it held a pretty high place in pop culture to me. And going back and watching it now, 26 years later, it does not hold up at all. It's really drags through the mud for me a lot. And it definitely, there are some moments in it that are good. I do appreciate the use of practical effects in a lot of the shots. I mean, I love the jump off the dam sequence for the most part until the end, because you could definitely tell, they realistically did that. I really like the tank sequence. I think that was really well done. I mean, just the idea of driving a tank through the streets and a tank being for the most part, a slow vehicle, it felt tense and pretty action packed, but that doesn't really make up for the fact that, it is a very disjointed movie that jumps all over the place, maybe even for the sake of jumping all over the place rather than having any real reason to. I did enjoy Pierce Brosnan as James Bond for the time. James Bond definitely does not hold up as a character under modern scrutiny, for sure. The machismo and the sexism that naturally exists in James Bond definitely is kind of hard to watch, from a modern perspective. But I do think that Pierce Brosnan was charming. I think that I believe him when I see him do action stuff. He definitely is probably at the top of my list of James Bonds. If I were sitting there, doing a list of them, but the shortcomings just outweigh any pros that I really have for this movie. Yeah.
It's funny to hear you mention Nintendo 64 and GoldenEye, the video game, because I don't know how to necessarily disassociate this film with that game. And how you mentioned pop culture. To me, its import comes more from the game than it does from the movie. I remember when the movie came out, everyone was definitely excited. I had a good friend whose father ended up buying that BMW in the film because he was obsessed with the idea of a new Bond. But what we were into was playing GoldenEye. And you're absolutely right. That was nonstop fun, playing deathmatch with friends. And even though we're not talking about that, I think it's a long way around of saying, man, I really loved that video game at the time. Watching this movie today is not great. I did not enjoy it one bit. There was just an element of it feeling so disjointed to me. Everything that kind of happened were just things that were happening, and I didn't find myself caring, and I never really attached to any of the characters. It was like, yeah, I'd rather, hey, can we go play some deathmatch again? And I don't know about the standards of CGI back in '95. In fact, maybe I do know about the standards of CGI. There was a lot of good films that did great CGI prior to 1995. Now I'll tell you right now, could they have not borrowed from like the Universal logo to create their planet Earth? This is the worst Earth I've ever seen in a movie, and it drives me crazy. And I know this sounds nitpicky because I still don't necessarily like the film, but when you see this Earth, this bluish green, non-planet formed. There's like no actual. There's no
Maybe in
actual Earth crust.
1995, NASA didn't share their library yet.
Oh, come on, you're killing me. You're killing me. It blew my mind that some of the, I guess, the CGI work, and as you mentioned, like things that were very obvious blue screen that just kind of, they hurt to see when you saw films do it better that came out earlier than this one. Um, I like the plane dive scene with like the base jumping and flying into the plane, sans parachute essentially. Then that was all pretty cool. And yes, the tank stuff was awesome. But I mean, did you hear the soundtrack?
Yeah, that hurt.
From the opening scene of him driving in the car with the woman who he's being just terrible to as a human being, and just the notion of the entire thing. I think there's only a couple of tracks that stand out. And you know why they stand out? Because they mimicked them in the video game.
This
So
is true.
you can kind of tell what I'm coming back here. I in a way, I'm just saying I don't think this movie is ever worth my eyes or my time ever seeing again. Poppy, tell me how you feel.
I mean, I think as a James Bond, an iteration of that series, which I believe is like the 18th or somewhere around there version of that, it's like one of the longest moving film series in history. So I feel like maybe on just that account, it's worth a watch. But I mean, yeah, this one it didn't really hold up super well for me either. I mean, well, I can talk about some of the things that I liked, which is just going to be repeating a lot of the things that you guys said too. Like, I really liked a lot of the stunts. I thought the stunts were really great. The plane stuff we mentioned, there was some really interesting snow stuff, like sledding and a lot of high falls and the plane stuff. And so it was really like a spectacle with the tank and all that stuff, and to just see that it was actually done, unlike maybe like some of the Fast and the Furious movies of these days, where it's basically like, I mean, it does have kind of like a Fast and the Furious vibe from 1995, where it's basically just like an over the top kind of thing where the giant horse statue falls on top of the tank and then it continues to move along with it. So I mean, there definitely is like, you have to suspend your disbelief, but I mean, the movie is all about just like popcorn entertainment, and I don't think it's trying to be anything more than just, it's a fun movie to watch for 2 hours. And um so that being said, I mean, I it was the first Pierce Brosnan James Bond, and I actually like just like you guys did, I like Pierce Brosnan as a James Bond, Matt. I think you nailed it where you said that he's pretty good with his delivery. I mean, Judi Dench was in this one too, so she had continued to be in the Bonds moving forward a lot. So she was really good, and I thought that some of the other characters were really interesting. But I mean, if I recall correctly, even the video game kind of relied on some of the previous Bonds. Like, was an odd job, and like you could like select some of the previous Bonds. So it's like almost the game said, "Hey, there's not enough here in this Bond. Like, let's take from like Jaws or whatever the guy was, an odd job, and use that even in the video game." But
You're absolutely right.
I mean, I think from the spectacle of it and the time that it came out, I mean, and I mean, what you were talking about with the CG, Austin, to give you an idea, like Toy Story, which was the first full feature length CG animated film, came out the exact same year, 1995. So
Oh, that puts it into a very insane light. Oh, this poor film, this poor film.
but I mean, I think in fairness, what they did with their, I mean, it's clear that they decided to like, okay, let's put our budget on, the the stunts and the spectacle of the stunts and some of these other things like the compositing and the background, or however they're like, okay, let's just, you know, we can go away with maybe spending a little bit less money to make this a little bit less more convincing than some of the other stuff. And what people will remember is the trailer moments, like the big kind of things. And so, I mean, I guess this movie is all about the trailer moments, and if it were kind of maybe chopped down into a smaller thing, it would be much much easier to watch. But yes, I agree that some of the storyline was disjointed, and
So a
um
re-edit. Okay, maybe this is the question. All right, we all are not putting a lot of favor onto this particular film. What would we change?
The soundtrack and the sound effects for sure for me. But I maybe there's a lot of the story that could be cut out. I mean, there's some elements that I think that are not as necessary that were entire story beats. I mean, I get some of the things that were in theory necessary, like the helicopter sequence. There's a whole sequence based around the helicopter, and realistically, it was only really there because it was impervious to the electromagnetic pulse or whatever. But was it really necessary at the end of the day? Like, its end result is midway through the movie, it gets blown up when the missile shoots itself or whatever to try to kill James Bond, because for whatever reason you can't just put a bullet in the guy's head. I guess you have to set an elaborate death trap that you leave, and I'm pretty sure that's what Austin Powers and everything was making fun of, the whole idea of that. Not that this is the first James Bond movie to do that, to be fair, but I think there's entire story beats that weren't even really necessary. That almost feels like it was a chance for the director to go to Monte Carlo, right? to go to places,
I will admit, the idea of writing your story around where you want to travel to is not the worst idea.
right. I mean, there's definitely a part of that. I mean, basically, like, the whole movie experience is something bigger than yourself and something really huge. And if they can have big spectacle like the trailer moments, like I mentioned, I think that's what they were going for. And I mean, maybe to the producers' credits, I mean, they have kind of grown the character a little bit in terms of, like, some of the newer movies, and it seems like they're moving forward with it. I mean, now that they have a little bit more competition with the Mission Impossible movies, which their stunts are just like incredible in those movies. I mean, like, I think with some of the things where those movies, I mean, like, to have Tom Cruise doing his own stuff, I mean, it's pretty clear, like, I mean, like, those kind of things are amazing when you can really tell that it's him actually doing the stunt. And it makes some of these movies pale a little bit in comparison when you could tell that when you don't see Pierce Brosnan's face, or when it's far away, or when you could tell that it's a stunt person doing it. I think maybe at the time it was just how it's done, and it's amazing to see. But nowadays, like, when Tom Cruise is actually doing the stunt, you can tell it's actually him, like, hanging out of a 2,000 foot tall story building or whatever. Like, like, I think there's a little bit more, like, the bar has been raised a little bit more
Yeah, I
from
mean that
from
makes
that.
sense. The idea of filming an insane person doing insane things.
Yeah, it's just to say, I mean, a man with a death wish is probably not the best bar to aim for. I will say that, but here's the thing, right? Like, I don't know, especially like thinking back on the action beats, I don't know if I could really say the action beats were bad in this movie. So if I compared it to a more modern movie, it's not like it's really pelling. Like, yeah, it doesn't hold up to a Jason Bourne movie or anything like that as far as the action and stuff goes. And yeah, he doesn't do his own stunts, but to me, that's not really where this movie kind of fails. I think it's all the stuff in between. I still, even knowing where the story goes, I really don't think that they did a very good job of portraying the villains' real goals. Like, I know the end result was they wanted to rob a bunch of money and then cover up their crime by shutting everything down. But the whole, underlying thing was the fact that Alec had a grudge against the government and all this stuff that honestly was just a conversation, and then it just kind of goes away. And there was nothing really that established that. In fact, it kind of felt like there should have been more focused on him just being really mad at, James Bond for leaving him for dead, right? And he got all scarred up as a result. But that wasn't really his objective. It was just petty theft, which they did comment on, right? James Bond himself was like, oh, that's all this is, just money. And then Alec tries to make it sound like it's something greater than that. I just feel like, and maybe this is of the time, but the villains in this movie weren't very fleshed out between Alec and Zinnia Onatop or whatever. I can't remember what the general's name is, but there wasn't real clear motivation in it, and that didn't really drive the story. And so really the action beats were driving the story, and everything in between was just there.
Those are the things that made it hurt. I guess I could ask in terms of how this series progressed. As we mentioned at the beginning, this seemed like a very pivotal movie to bring back the Bond franchise. How do we feel it's grown since then? We're sitting here, 26 years later, saying, well, this one wasn't the greatest. You already brought up, it's a competitor with Mission Impossible. How has the series progressed as they went through the additional Pierce Brosnan films and then eventually switching over the lead actor to Daniel Craig?
In my mind, I mean, the best is yet to come. I mean, I think they can continue going on with James Bond as a series, but I do think that, like you mentioned, Matt, like it needs to change. The character is a dinosaur. I mean, and I think that they need to realize that and change it. And I think that that's okay to change it. I mean, I don't think that he needs to be the exact same guy every time. I mean, obviously they recast him every like however many movies. I mean, I know that like what was it, Timothy Dalton was in 3, and there's another guy who was 1, and then some of them were in a lot of movies. But I do think that some of the Daniel Craig movies were really good. I mean, I think Casino Royale was personally my favorite James Bond movie in the series, and I think part of the reason that was one of my favorites is because I think it was a little bit it kind of reached a little bit more of an emotional depth for me than some of the previous ones had. Because I mean, when you watch a James Bond movie in the past, you kind of knew what you were getting into, right? Like you knew, like, okay, he's a spy, there's going to be some stunts, there's going to be some good action, and he's going to have his vodka martini, shaken, not stirred, and he's going to get the girl. Well, I think that they kind of like, he still had the action, he still had the stunts, and he still even had his vodka martini, although they did mention like, okay, your liver isn't really holding up that well, because of all of your vodka martinis. But they had a little bit more emotional depth with the female characters, and I think that that's desperately needed. And I think moving forward, I mean, they're even talking about having like actors like Idris Elba or other people, like women playing the Bond character or Bond, and I think that that's a great thing. And I mean, I think that it's probably, like, frankly, a missed opportunity to have spin-offs and to create a whole world around this. I mean, at one point, like, they were talking about having like Halle Berry's character from her movie like into another movie, and that never happened. But I think that there's an opportunity here. We often talk about like Netflix series and all that kind of stuff, but I think there's room here for more growth, and I think it's possible
Hearing you
that the best
describe
is
all
yet to come.
that, hearing you describe all that, I will say, feels a little bit Doctor Who. Ever changing, the characters' faces ever changing into something different. A woman lead, I wasn't even aware of that. So that's all very interesting. I guess to bring it back to GoldenEye, it just not this many years later. Never again. Never again, Matt.
Well, I will say this was the best Pierce Brosnan James Bond movie. If I compare this to like Tomorrow Never Dies, like it's by and far the best, without a doubt, as far as like the quality, the story, whatever. Um, I'm not as big of a fan of the Daniel Craig stuff as I think a lot of people are. I appreciate it for what it is, but and it did the same thing, right? Casino Royale, directed by the same director as GoldenEye, and it revitalized the franchise in a new direction, ultimately copying, what Jason Bourne and Mission Impossible was currently doing. Me personally, I for James Bond as it exists to go on, for me, considering the competition, everything else that's out there, I actually want them to kind of do the reverse of a lot of what a lot of people have been talking about. I want them to take James Bond out of contemporary. I don't want James Bond in my world. I want James Bond in the Cold War. I think that they should have kept him in the 60s perpetually because that's when he was written for. And that's the kind of character he is. Because at the end of the day, a spy existing today, no one should ever know his name. You know, that shouldn't be something where, you know, he would be like, why does he give his real name? Really? Why? He tells everybody he is the worst spy on earth ever. Like the only way I could ever like forgive it is if he actually wasn't the spy. There's actually some dude who was actually doing all the real work in the background as he was going around and making explosions, and the other dude was doing the, you know, the actual spying and getting stuff done.
I like that idea. I like the idea of retro Bond.
Well, I have a question. Is James Bond his actual name, or is that just a name that they give him?
I mean, it could be argued. I mean, it would be interesting, you know, if his name was something else and he took a new name, or, you know, some other form of using it as cover. Would be a very interesting concept, but they've never gone that deep into it. I mean, they kind of, what was it in Skyfall? They tried to go a little bit into his past, a little bit.
Yeah, how he's like an orphan or something, right?
Yeah, and so it very well could have been an interesting concept of having James Bond just being a moniker or something like that. And I know that's something they're trying to do now with, James Bond isn't really a singular person. Like every time you see a change, it's not like it's supposed to be the same character. Like potentially it could be different people just inhabiting the name. I've never really been a big fan of that. I just don't think that really holds true. It's just trying to make movies and make a profit or whatever. It's continuing it and trying to update it as much as possible. I don't think that anyone's really, I mean, just the fact that not very many of these movies are really based off of, you know, actual books anymore, you know, but at the end of the day, I think that for me, this doesn't hold up 26 years later. You know, my watching this on VHS back in the day as a youngin', you know, enjoyed it way more than, you know, 36-year-old Matt does. And I appreciate it for what it is, but I'm not going to ever watch it again.
Ever again.
Ever again.
And Bobby, your recommendation here?
I mean, I think if you're a fan of the series and you haven't seen this one and you're curious to, you know, go back in time and see what the other ones are, I mean, I think that, you know, it's worth watching for the milestone that it was. You know, the first Brosnan movie, you know, it was a big hit at the time. So I think if you're interested in a history lesson about James Bond, then go ahead and watch it. But otherwise, like if you're interested in being entertained for, you know, it's a little bit much for the 2-hour plus runtime that it is, and I think that it's probably passable at this point for me.
Yeah, I think I'll just jump in between both of you. Ultimately, don't watch this. But if you really, really want to torture yourself, maybe just, you know, hit up YouTube and watch one of those 10-minute breakdowns, because that'll give you everything you need about this film and probably be a lot more entertaining for you. So with that said, we appreciate you taking the time to listen, and we will see you next time.